All right, we're going to connect two things that seem worlds apart. The reason you have your dad smile and the 4 billion-year story of life on Earth. Turns out it's all one incredible story, and it's our story. So let's trace it all the way back.
You know, it all kicks off with a really simple, personal question. You look in the mirror, you see an old family photo, and there it is, a feature you recognize staring right back at you. So why is that? How does something like the shape of your nose or the color of your eyes actually get passed down?
Well, the scientific answer to that question is a single word: heredity. It's just the process of traits being passed on from parents to their kids. This is the basic machinery behind all those family resemblances. But how does it really work under the hood?
Okay, so let's start with the first piece of the puzzle, the basic rules that explain why you look the way you do. And the first big clues, believe it or not, were found in a very, very unexpected place.
Yep, you heard that right. The journey to understanding our own genetic code doesn't start in a fancy high-tech lab. It starts in a quiet monastery garden with a monk who is just really, really curious about his pea plants.
And through his incredibly careful experiments, this monk was about to do something amazing. He was about to crack the code of inheritance and reveal the hidden rules of life itself. His name was Gregor Mendel, and today we call him the father of genetics for a very good reason. See, before him, people kind of thought traits just blended together, like mixing two colors of paint. But Mendel was the first to realize, no, that's not it. Traits are passed down in these neat, predictable little packages.
So how did he figure this out? Well, let's walk through his most famous experiment. First, he took plants he knew would always grow tall and crossed them with plants that would only ever be short or dwarf. You might expect to get a bunch of medium-sized plants, right? But nope. That first generation, he called it F1, they were all tall, every single one. Then, and this is where it gets really clever, he let those tall plants pollinate themselves.
And what he saw in that second generation was mind-blowing. That dwarf trait, which had totally disappeared, suddenly popped back up, and it wasn't random. Just look at this chart. He consistently got 3 tall plants for every 1 dwarf plant, a perfect 3-to-1 ratio. That pattern was the clue that there were hidden rules at work. This is where Mendel's genius really kicks in. He realized what that 3-to-1 ratio meant. He theorized that for every trait, you get 2 factors, what we now call genes, and one of those factors can totally hide the other one. The one that shows up, like tallness, he called dominant, and the one that gets hidden, like dwarfism, he called that recessive. It's still there, just kind of lurking in the background, waiting for its chance. And this brings us to a really key idea. The genotype, that's the actual genetic recipe you have inside you, the combination of genes. But the phenotype is what you actually see on the outside, the physical trait. So, as Mendel showed, a plant could have the genes for tallness from both parents, or just one, and either way, its phenotype would be tall. It's the difference between the architect's blueprint and the actual building you see. Okay, so Mendel gave us the rulebook for how traits are passed down. But how does that create the absolutely staggering variety of all life on Earth? That brings us to the engine of it all, evolution.
So what is a gene anyway, when you get right down to it? Well, think of your DNA as a giant cookbook with thousands of recipes. A single gene is like one recipe in that book, and that recipe gives the instructions to build one specific thing, a protein. And it's the proteins that do, well, pretty much everything. They build your body, determine your eye color, everything. They're the real workers.
Now, this is a super important point. There's a big difference between acquired traits and inherited traits. Acquired traits are things that happen to you in your life. You get a scar, you learn a language, you build muscle. You can't pass those things on to your kids through your genes. Inherited traits, on the other hand, are coded in your DNA. These are the only things that get passed on, and they are the raw fuel for evolution.
So how does that fuel actually drive change? Let's tell a quick story. Imagine a bunch of red beetles living among some green bushes. They stick out, and crows just love to snack on them. But then, thanks to a random little genetic change, a green beetle is born. Suddenly, it has a massive advantage. It's camouflaged. It's much more likely to survive, have baby beetles, and pass on its green genes. Over generations, the whole beetle population becomes mostly green. That, right there, is natural selection.
But it's not always about survival of the fittest. Sometimes, it's just about survival of the luckiest. Picture a mix of red and blue beetles. One day, an elephant wanders by and just randomly stomps on a bunch of the red ones. It wasn't because the blue beetles were better or stronger, it was just pure, dumb luck. Now the surviving blue beetles reproduce, and just by chance, the population's genes drift toward being blue. That's called genetic drift.
Okay, so we've got a mechanism for how life can change over time. But how do we know this has actually been happening for billions of years? Well, for that we have to become detectives and look for clues left behind in the past.
Scientists have this amazing toolkit for piecing together the evolutionary story. They look at a few main types of evidence: the fossil record, something called homologous organs, the flip side, analogous organs, and, of course, by comparing DNA directly. Let's touch on a couple of these.
This one is so cool. Homologous organs. Just take a second and think about your own arm. Now picture a bird's wing, or a whale's flipper. We use our arms for grabbing, birds use wings for flying, whales use flippers for swimming. Totally different jobs, right? But if you look at the bone structure inside, it's startlingly similar. That's a massive clue that we all inherited that basic blueprint from a shared ancestor way back when.
But then you have the opposite case, analogous organs. Think about a bird's wing and a bee's wing. They both do the exact same thing. They're for flying. But if you look at how they're built, they couldn't be more different. One has bones, the other is made of this stuff called chitin. This tells us they did not get their wings from a common ancestor. Instead, they both evolved the solution to flight completely independently.
So all of this, from Mendel's peas to beetle camouflage to ancient bones, brings us to the most personal part of the story, our own. Where do we fit into this enormous, branching tree of life?
Well, for all the incredible and beautiful diversity you see in people all across the globe, here's a simple fact. We are all one species, Homo sapiens. And the evidence from our genes and the fossil record is crystal clear. Our species journey began in one place, Africa.
From that starting point, our ancestors set off on one of the most amazing journeys in the history of life. Waves of migrations pushed out of Africa, first spreading across Asia and Europe. From there, other groups traveled all the way to Australia. And eventually, the final wave made it into the Americas. It's just a stunning testament to our adaptability.
So here's a really critical idea to take away from all this. It's a huge mistake to think of evolution as some kind of ladder of progress with humans at the very top. It's not like that at all. It's much more like a gigantic, messy, sprawling tree with millions of branches. And every single species alive today is a modern success story thriving on its own unique branch.
And that leaves us with a final thought. This whole process, the one that started with the first spark of life, has never stopped. It connects you, right now, to Mendel's peas, to those beetles, to our ancient ancestors. You are a living part of this unbroken 4-billion-year-old story. And so the question becomes, what's our next chapter going to look like? What new variations are already unfolding in our species right now?